So let's get started. We've got a lot of content to cover today. So definitely in true fashion, we've got at least 60 minutes worth of content. We'll try to fit it in 40 minutes or less. But today's session is all about leveraging product usage and adoption data to inform your customer lifecycle engagement and outreach. I'll tell you, a lot of folks I've seen so many comprehensive customer life cycles or customer journeys, whatever you feel like calling them, that feel really strong, but don't have a way to leverage data and insights to modify the experience of the engagement and the outreach that they have with their customers. And so given that, I'm a strong believer that if your customers aren't using your product, right, there's probably an issue there. I want to talk today about how can we take the insights that we might be learning about how our customers are using our product across their organizations to inform different behaviors that we want to be sharing with our teams to enhance the experience and obviously the value outcome as well. So we're going to dive into this today. Now, please bear with me. I don't have a mouse. I'm using a little mouse pad on my laptop, which is not my favorite. All right, so let's talk about this for a second. I gotta tell you, I have had so many folks who have shared with me, no, my customer is really happy. They're getting a lot of value from the partnership. They're really engaged. They talk to us all the time. They're speaking at one of our events. They just did a podcast. But then when they go and they unpack data and insights, they actually find that their customers aren't strong users of their solution. And let me tell you, while all of the other things that you're providing for your customers are fantastic and definitely value adds, they purchased your product to solve a problem. And if they're not using your product, they're likely not solving that problem. So while I won't say that it's an absolute, right, because nothing is black and white, but you do want to make sure that your customers are using your solution. So it's important for you to pay attention to usage and adoption metrics and making sure that your team of CSMs, or if you are a CSM, that you're intervening at the appropriate time to make sure that you're getting your customers back on track. So this is a big area of focus, right? I've seen customer health scores or success scores designed that don't really pay a lot of attention to usage and adoption, right? They make that it's either not a piece of the criteria or it's a very small percentage of allocation. But the reality of it is customer usage and adoption does tell you a lot about how your customers are engaging in the value that they're getting from the partnership. So at the end of the day, if they're not using it, it is something to be concerned of. Now, I will flip it on its head and say, listen, I've had customers who have had phenomenal usage and adoption and have still churned. So there are no absolutes, right? There's nothing to say that it's as black as white and saying if they're using it, great value and retaining them as a customer, or if they're not, that they're going to churn, right? But we can use this to just really drive different behaviors and hopefully different outcomes. So the first thing I want to do is I want to separate out the two kind of terms I'm going to be talking about today, right? One of those being usage, the other being adoption. So when I think about usage, this is like how your customers are using your product. What I think about here is the number of users, right? Their daily logins, their percent of active users, right? Against maybe total licenses or something bought, or if we think about consumption, license activation, right? So maybe they have bought 10 licenses and they're only using 5 of those today. Maybe they haven't even assigned the other 5. What do usage trends look like over whatever period of time? That could be 7 days, 14 days, 30 days. And then logins by role type. Now, again, these are not the only metrics that you might look at, but I wanted to give you an example so that when I use these terms today, it kind of makes sense as to how I'm positioning them and why I might look at certain things differently than others. Now, these are all really critical. I think especially even that last one, at ClientSuccess, we serve the customer success organizations, right? So it's not uncommon that we might be working with an ops manager or an admin or a leader in that organization to help drive the strategy. But at the end of the day, we need to make sure that their team of CSMs are using the product, right? So for us, we look at that role type as well. Those end users are almost more critical than sometimes the admins or the ops person, right? Because once they've built something out in our solution, they might not be in it every single day. Whereas, the CSMs who might be using our product, they should be, right? If you're supporting customers, you're engaging with them, hopefully you're using the platform that you have access to. So also specifying, are the right people using it the right way? Now, on the adoption side, I think about things like feature adoption, right? Again, using ClientSuccess as an example, we have a multitude of different modules in our product. So we have the ability to understand, hey, is our customer using, our engagements? Are they using success cycles? Are they using our success score? Are they using goals, right? So we have the ability to see how they're using all the different parts of our product. And so when I think about feature adoption, It's how they're using those different elements, right? Not just saying that it's all the same, because we know that some parts of our product probably drive a little bit more value than others. Feature usage, right? Are they using all of them? So not even just the depth and adoption of one individual feature, but are there a bunch of features that they're just not using at all? And it could be because they haven't purchased them, they don't have access to them, right? There's a multitude of things that can play into that, but we want to make sure that they're using the different features. Stickiness. Now, I think it's an interesting one, and Slack, I think, did a really great job of this. When Slack was trying to measure, how they'd be able to engage end users, they came up with a number that said if a user sends X amount of Slacks, that they actually have hit this stickiness quota, and that they'll now be able to adopt Slack into their workflow. And so I thought that was really interesting. And I'm sure, as again, all of our products do provide a ton of value, there are probably elements of it that would help you say, hey, if your customers cross this threshold, it probably indicates that they're getting a ton of value. They've integrated it into their workflow. It's kind of a part of their behaviors. So what does stickiness look like for you? Percent of features purchased. Again, at ClientSuccess, we don't have a ton of add-on features, right? We like to build and innovate into the solution. So anybody who has access to our product is kind of also taking advantage of all of our innovation. But percent of features purchased is an important thing to think about as well. If you're a product, like let's say you're Oracle, you probably have a lot of different products in your suite that you can offer to any particular customer. But if they're only using one, right, versus a customer who might be using 10 of your products, that's going to help tell a different story, right? That adoption is much greater. You're more embedded into their business, their organization, their operating model. So what is the percentage of features purchased? And then lastly, the percentage of features used, right? Because again, they could purchase these things, but not necessarily be using them. So looking at those two metrics kind of side by side as well. So again, the intention here is not to say that these are the only things that you might be thinking about or considering, but rather to introduce the fact that these two can be different. And when you're thinking about usage and you're thinking about adoption, right? If your customer is logging in every day, whoop-de-doo, right? That's great that they're logging in, but if they're not using the product as intended to drive and solve for the outcomes that they had intended to, right? The value might not be there for them. And that gap might cause a problem long-term. So now that we're on the same page with what those are, I want to introduce what this might look like in the life cycle of how you're engaging with your customers. Now, for those of you who have attended my boot camps in the past, you should be familiar with our lifecycle infinity loop, where we've got 4 stages in our customer lifecycle: align, execute, realize, and advocate. So in the first stage for us, when we think about how would we measure, or what is the adoption and usage that we might be looking for, the first one is all about user license assignment and product enablement. So again, if I'm thinking about this through the lens of client success, right? So for us, when a customer comes on board, we make sure that one, we create their tenant or their instance of client success, and we make sure that they have access to all the things that they've purchased. For the most part, like I said, it might be a few product add-ons, but for the most, it's licenses. And so we want to make sure that we've got the licenses enabled properly in their tenant, and that we've assigned those out to whomever the users are going to be. So very early on, that's what we're focused on, right? That's as far as the usage and adoption is going to go. Because again, if you're slightly familiar with our life cycle here, Align is really just all about that first initial engagement with our customers and level setting around the partnership. Now, once we get beyond Align, we move into our execute stage, which for some of you might emulate something that feels more aligned with onboarding. So for us, adoption and usage in this stage in the life cycle is going to be focused more on product configuration and training enablement, right? We've got this new tenant that we've stood up for them, their client success instance, but there's a lot you have to build into our product. For example, if you are wanting to create a customer health score, you're going to have to make sure that all of your data is imported into the solution. You're going to make sure that you're building that and configuring in a way that matches what your business would kind of think is healthy. You might be creating and configuring all of your customer success cycles or your playbooks, configuring your scorecard, integrating all of your solutions, configuring your email addresses, and setting up your CRM, right? So there's a lot that you have to do to configure the product in a way that is going to allow you to have strong usage and adoption. And that's really what we focus on in that early stage of partnership is, did we set up the product in a way that is going to help them independently use this long-term in a way that's going to help them achieve their goals? Now, the second element of this is training and enablement. It's not enough to just help our customers configure the platform or even explain how they should configure it. We've got to make sure that we're training and enabling them on how to use it effectively. And so training enablement is not just for our core main users, maybe like our admins or our leaders. We want to go beyond that and actually make sure that we're training end users as well. Now, a lot of companies take the approach of train the trainer, right? So if you train your admin or some core folks in your organization, it's now their responsibility to continue that training with the broader group. And that's totally a fine approach. For us, we don't use train the trainer any longer. We are moving more to us training and enabling the teams, just because there's so many nuances about our product, but we also want to educate around workflows, because at the end of the day, our CSMs are basically speaking to their peers, other CSMs. So those like-minded individuals can get a lot of value from those conversations. In stage 3 for us, we think about advanced product adoption and workflow integration. This is where we're going to see how they're adopting our product change over time. So for example, in the beginning, advanced product adoption, maybe initially it's a lot about, okay, are they logging in? Are they doing simple things like, are they logging their calls with their customers? Whereas advanced product adoption might for us look like, are they updating their pulse in their account? Are they executing and managing success cycles effectively, right? Are they updating, all the different fields and things like that? Are they using reporting? How are they manipulating data? Are they doing imports and exports, right? So there's a ton of different things that we might look at later stages in the life cycle. And so that's important to distinguish as well. An early customer who is just getting acclimated with your solution is not going to use your product the same way that a veteran customer of yours who has been around for maybe a couple of years, they might be using it very differently, right? The level of sophistication just isn't there yet. So as you're going through your customer journey or that customer lifecycle, it's important to make sure that you're establishing what does that advanced product adoption need to look like for your customers. And the other thing that we look at is workflow integration. Now, this is going to help us understand, this is going to kind of correlate more with usage and less with adoption, right? Because that workflow integration, we know that customer success managers should be using their customer success management solution daily, right? As long as you're engaging with customers, you should be in your solution. Whether you're logging calls, you're executing and managing tasks, again, you're managing the data and you're looking at customer health or executing on success cycles, whatever the case may be, there's always something for you to be doing in our product. So the more an end user, or in our case, a CSM is using our product, right, we're going to be able to see, have they really truly integrated this into their workflow? If they're logging into our product once a week, product work, like the workflow integration, right, it's not there. We haven't integrated ourselves into their workflow. So that's really also important to distinguish. If you have a product that's something that your customer should be using once a month, that's great. So then that data is going to look very different. But if you have a product that your customers should be using daily, all day, every day, right, you want to make sure that you're distinguishing between the two, because good is going to look different for every single product. The last thing that we consider here, so in our advocacy stage, we're really focused here on user license growth and new product consumption. So this is going to say, like, is our customer now adding more users? So when we think about users, right, the percentage of users or that number going up, product feature consumption, would that go up? So are they adding on new elements to the product? Are they expanding the ones that they have, even increasing limits on those things, or adding new users on an ongoing basis, right? So like I said, these are some of the things that we pay attention to here at ClientSuccess to help guide us. Obviously, there's a multitude of metrics and data points that go into each of these, but wanting to really just introduce how you should all be thinking about your different stages in your life cycle and what good would look like for each of your customers when you think about it through the lens of usage and adoption. So here's an example of our success score in ClientSuccess. So this is a screenshot. No customer data here is being shared, so I don't have to worry about any of that, but wanted to just kind of give you guys a sneak peek into how we're designing and configuring some of our data points. So our health score, and we use this in parallel with a few other metrics. So we don't just use health score, we also use pulse and some other elements as well to really distinguish customer health and sentiment and all these things. But our health score takes into account a few things. First is CSM adoption. Now I mentioned, right, the end user for us is almost more important than the admin or an ops manager, because they might not need to be tinkering in the platform every day and making changes, but a CSM should be using it every day. So the first thing that we configured in our health score is CSM adoption. And you'll look and see there that we've got 25 points out of 100 allocated to that, because that's pretty important, right? We want to make sure that CSMs at the end of the day are getting value from our product and they're using it and adopting it into their workflow. The next thing we look at is overall adoption. Now, I will say that there are different metrics that are layered in each of these. If you look at the little caret pointing down, there's a drop down there and unpacks a bunch of data. But for today's session, I think it's just important to introduce conceptually what we're doing here. The second one is overall adoption, which will look at everybody, right? Our executive stakeholders, CSMs, anybody who's using the platform at all. So it kind of creates all adoption equal, all of those users. And then the last thing that we use there is usage, which again, this is going to focus more on logins and things of that nature. So some of the metrics that I introduced earlier in our first slide where we distinguish between usage and adoption. Now in our health score, we also look at things like sentiment, and you'll see here that we've only allocated 5 points to that. Engagement, 15 points is right. How often or how engaged are we with our customers? And then advocacy, we've got 10 points there. Yes, advocacy is a big goal of ours. But again, when we think about just customer health, in terms of how are our customers behaving, right? Are they behaving like a good looking customer? These are the metrics that we've said are important for us. And like I said, we've got other things that we take into consideration as well, but it helps us at least understand, our customers using the solution the way that they intended to achieve the goals they intended to. So a few things I want to just help you guys understand about this. One, it is important to include usage and adoption data into your customer health score. Now, if you're using a solution other than ClientSuccess, most other customer success management products will allow you some health scoring mechanism to go and create that. I just highly encourage you to make sure that you're pulling in those usage and adoption metrics into it, because it's going to help inform you how your customers are using your product. You want to make sure that you're designing it with the right metrics and weighting. So like I said, I didn't really go through and show you all the different metrics that we've gotten here, but we have different ways of viewing how our customers might use our product and the areas that we think that they might get more value from. And so all of those are configured and things that we take into consideration. For you, you're going to have to do the same research, right? Figure out what are the right metrics that you should be looking at across adoption and usage, but then also make sure that you've got the right weighting. So again, if you look here, I've got 60 points out of 100 allocated to this. That's a lie. I have 70. So I've got 50 for CSM adoption and overall adoption, and usage is another 20. So that's a lot of the percentage of the health score. And like I said, perhaps it's because we've got other ways to look at data. Like I said, our customer health, our customer pulse, and some other metrics. But we've allocated a lot of insights here because this really helps inform how our customers are behaving, right? So what are they doing independently without our guidance? The next thing to consider here is that customer health is not universal, right? All of your customers are going to or should have a different looking success score, either based on the stages that they are in a life cycle, what segments they roll up into, what products they've purchased, their use case, all of these things. And so just remember that your health score doesn't need to be a one-size-fits-all model. Think creatively about, should we have a different success score for different customers based on different criteria, looking at different data points? So I think that's a really important thing to consider, because I have seen many companies just go and create a one-size-fits-all health score. But the reality of it is, if you've got a smaller customer versus your strategic or enterprise customers, how they use your product, the number of users, right? All of those things are going to change and evolve. So it's important to not look at them and view them the same. The next is to understand trends as it relates to your product. This goes back to, should your customers be using your product every day, or is your product something that they should be using every month or every quarter or once a week, right? But understanding the trends in their usage also helps that. I see sometimes that there's seasonality, right? So depending, and not necessarily here at ClientSuccess, but in other organizations I've worked at, where things would drop during certain times of the year. For example, I worked at a company, and one of our largest customers, customer bases, right, their industry was education. And so we knew that our education institutions that we worked with would drop significantly during the summer months, right? Because no one was there. Students aren't in school, faculty is not there. So we had to make sure that we accounted for that. And we didn't want to get concerned or raise any red flags or trigger any playbooks once we saw that drop, because we knew that's just based on seasonality of their business. I also worked in another industry where we served retail very heavily. And I will tell you, retail also has same fluctuation and volatility in the calendar, right? You come up upon certain holidays, things are going to spike up on how they might be using your product. So know who your customers are and make sure that you're intimately familiar with the trends on how they might be using your product. Just so that way you're taking all that into consideration when you're designing this. And then monitor over time to identify what good looks like. It's fine to start with something where you're making some guesses and some assumptions, but why don't you take some time after that you've created this and just monitor that data and then look at it based on, the outcomes. Now, we know that churn and retention are lagging indicators, even advocacy to some extent. And so look to see, where the trends of how our customers were using the product and consuming it, did that mirror the outcome that we saw from a business standpoint, right? Does this really tell us the right things? And it's okay to make those adjustments. It's okay to start with something and guess if you don't have a lot of data and insight, but then just make sure that you're paying attention to it and modifying it over time. So let's talk about a product adoption, right? In terms of how to think about it and how to integrate it into the work that you're doing with your customers. Now, the first thing to think about is how sticky is your product to new users, right? So as you're starting to measure out metrics, look at that, right? Like a new user who's coming on board, whether it be you've got a net new customer, or maybe your customers bought new licenses and they're bringing on new users, or you've got a new exec who's taken over. How sticky is your product for them? And what can you do to increase how they're using it to drive value? Something else you should be paying attention to is which behaviors correlate best with engagement and retention, right? So think about how your customer is using the product today. And this kind of goes back to my last point about monitoring that data and making that kind of doing that analysis to see, our customer was using it and this is how they were using it for the past year. Did they stay or did they go? Could be an initial place to start when you're doing that analysis, but start to figure out which of those behaviors correlate with a very highly engaged customer and a customer who stays with you long term. Something else to consider and think about when you're kind of analyzing product adoption is which pre-adoption behaviors best predict adoption. So let me explain, right? For us, when we are selling our product, we talk a lot about our customers and their strategy. And the hope for us always is that our customers understand that you've got to have a defined customer success strategy before you buy a solution, because the solution isn't your strategy. It's a mechanism to help you execute that strategy more effectively, right? And to scale. So we know that when we have certain conversations, or if we engage with let's say their CRM admin, or we get a technical resource on the call, or if our customer really truly does have their strategy fully baked and designed, we know that we're probably going to have a higher success rate of not only onboarding, but getting them to use and adopt the platform overall. Right? If they understand how to drive change management and they're really having a top-down deployment of our solution, we're gonna be more successful. So understanding what can you do to help ensure that your customers are gonna be most successful, but doing that as early as possible. Something else that we pay attention to is how does the speed of adoption impact retention? Now, I'm sure all of you, I'm hopeful anyway, that many of you have been exposed to the notion that like onboarding will make or break the long-term partnership with your customer, right? A successful onboarding where you've got the product well configured, they've had a good experience, you've trained and enabled all the end users, that is probably going to have a positive impact and a direct reflection on how your customers use the product over time, their ability to get value from it, and then hopefully retain and become advocates as well. So think about that direct correlation. Now, I will say when you get to a place and you're like, hey, okay, does it need to be 60 days or 90 days because somebody out there in the industry said so? Please don't do that, right? Take into consideration your customer's timeline, their resources, their ability to move quickly, your program. Obviously, have some flags and indicators when things might be going sideways, but remember, even onboarding can't necessarily be a one-size-fits-all. Try to find something that is maybe a one-size-fits-most with some flexibility built in and designed. But understanding that time to value can impact retention. But remember, your time to value does not need to be the same time to value for everybody else. So make it personalized, make it your own, but understand your product, your users, and the direct correlation. Something else to consider is how often and how much are users spending time in your product, right? This goes back to what I talked about, right? Like, are they logging in every day? Should they be logging in every day? Should they be logging in every week or month? And how much time are they spending when they get there? So for us, I'm totally cool if every user logs in once, but they're in the product all day. That means that they're using it the right way. Because as a CS leader, I will tell you, my CSMs on my team who are using the product really effectively, because again, we drink our own champagne, we use our product. My CSMs are literally in the platform all day, every day, as they should be, because they're speaking with and engaging with their customers all day, every day. And so it's important to just make sure that you understand what that correlation should look like. If they're not spending the time that they should be, perhaps they don't know what to do, or they're struggling with integrating it into their workflow. They've got challenges because they're used to doing it the way that they've always done it, and maybe they're not familiar with how to make that change. But whatever those signals are, those indicators, it's important to make sure that you're aware of your product and your users and paying attention to that. The last thing here that I'll talk about is, do your users continue to add on or use new products and features over time? This is important. I don't ever expect any of my customers to use 100% of our features out the gate right after onboarding. It doesn't work that way. Our product is pretty robust in the sense that there's tons of different workflows and things that they need to get to over time. And so you might want to have your customers step into your solution. That means maybe there's a land and expand model, right? So they buy one part of your product, and the goal there, either with your account management team or your customer success team, is that, hey, we just want to get their foot in the door. And over time, we're going to help them get so much value out of product A that when they're ready for product B, we'll help them take advantage of B and C and D and so on, right? Or we're going to start with this one core team because they've got a really great use case that really supports what our product is designed to do. Over time, guess what? We're going to now sell into marketing, we're going to sell into sales, and we're going to sell into finance and customer success, right? Your land and expand model might be expanding into the organization, it might be expanding into features, it might be a combination of both. But paying attention to that is going to be really critical as well. Now, we know if our customers are not growing with us, I used to say like they're dying, but they tend to move backwards, right? If there's not growth and forward momentum, it's probably because they're not either getting what they need, it's not working well for them, right? Their experience isn't ideal, but there's something happening there. As your customer success professional, you need to go dig in and figure out, well, what is prohibiting them from using it the way that they've intended and growing with us over time? And then make sure that you're doing your part as their internal advocate to help them navigate that. So these are only 6 things to consider. Now, I'll tell you, there is a multitude of things that you should be paying attention to. And depending on the complexity of your product, that is going to evolve. So I give you these 6 as just a place to start, right? Questions to ask yourself as you're thinking through, hey, do we actually really know what good looks like? Are our customers really truly using our solution in a way that's going to be meaningful to their product and helping them achieve their end goals? Now, I'll talk to you about a few different lifecycle adoption and usage milestones. There's 8 in total, so you'll see 4 here and then 4, but I will change some colors around. The first is understanding your onboarding. Right? So I talked about this a little bit earlier, but how critical onboarding is. But once your product is configured based on your customers' needs, how they're planning to use the product, it's critical to make sure that you're also training and enabling them. So they understand, great, now that I have this solution and it mirrors the strategy that we're hoping to deploy, how do I make sure that the team is using this, right? So onboarding is going to be a really critical place to start paying attention to adoption and usage and creating milestones there that reflect your product, your users, and your business. So if you haven't mapped out what good looks like coming out of onboarding, I would definitely recommend you start there. The next one, I just use the term adoption. This is more general for maybe our kind of journey in stage 3. But the idea here is after you've onboarded your customers, what does their adoption look like for your product over time? Now, in a high engagement model, you might have a CSM team who's engaging with your customers on a regular cadence, right? That could be biweekly, could be monthly, could be, even quarterly. But you've got a team there who's allocated to helping your customers understand how to optimize the product, how to make the most out of it, introducing new use cases. And so it's really critical that you understand as your customers move out of onboarding, what does that adoption need to look like to show that your customers are advancing? Because onboarding, again, especially if you've got a complex product, there is no way you can cover everything, right? It's going to be very difficult. You might be covering a small portion of things just to get your customers set up with their V1 of your product, right? But that ongoing engagement with them is going to help them start to move to V2 and V3. So adoption will change. So while onboarding is critical, onboarding can't be a set it and forget it. Onboarding is not the last time that you're engaging with your customers and helping them understand how to get value from adoption. The next stage that I've called out here, right, or the next point to think about is growth, right? You've got a customer who maybe is adding on new users. How are you making sure that each time a new user is brought on board, right, whether that's an end user or a new admin or something else, how are you training and enabling those individuals? Now, they might not have been part of the core team that you trained during onboarding, right? Companies are growing all the time. I know that I've got a whole team of new folks over the past year and a half here at ClientSuccess. But how do I make sure that they're being onboarding and trained effectively? Because just because you're a CSM or an AM and you might be helping them grow the account, that's great. But you can't forget the fact that each of those new users that you've added, you've got to account for each of their success. So having a plan in place that's going to help you figure out, what do we do every time we bring somebody new on? Now, I'm going to talk to you about some programs that you can use at scale, but accounting for growth and how you're paying attention to and helping your customers use and adopt your product is critical. The next thing I think about is support. Your customers are likely going to be engaging with your technical support team. Hopefully you have a technical support team, but it's okay if you don't. Whoever is managing support, meaning the technical questions that are coming in from your customers, you need to make sure that your support team is equipped with the knowledge that's going to make them effective in helping guide your customers, right? How many times do your customers have questions about the product, right? I'm trying to do this and I can't figure it out. They might go to support and log a ticket. I know that when we look at our support and do kind of an analysis around our tickets, we see a bunch that would fall into like a training enablement bucket because it's questions about our product that our customers have as they're starting to use it into their workflows. So you've got to make sure that as they're engaging with support, that you've got a way to help guide them, right? Whether that is with knowledge, information to either help self-guide, or if you've got resources there to allocate to them, that you make sure that they have the information they need when they need it. 4 other things that I consider is turnover, right? As you're thinking about your customer lifecycle, I'm sure many of us, if not all of us, have been in a situation where somebody's left, right? Now let's use the example if your executive stakeholder leaves. Now, in our case here at ClientSuccess, again, because we support customer success teams, if our VP of success leaves, for example, and they hire a new one, great, we're excited to partner with them. But they might have an entirely different view or strategy that they're looking to deploy, which means how they use the product, what's important to them is different, meaning how our customers use and adopt the product might be different as a result of that. So you've got to be able to account for things like that and make sure that it's reflected in how you're paying attention to flagging and then obviously helping support your customer over time. Something else we look at is poor adoption, right? Your CS team needs to be able to intervene when they see that their customer is not adopting the product as intended, right? It is so easy for me to see, I mean, we see this all the time, and not just with me, with the customers that we work with, where everyone is so excited in the beginning, right? You get the product stood up, they've rolled it out, everyone's using it, and then all of a sudden, usage declines over time. And some people are just like, oh, that's normalization of data, right? Or whatever excuses you want to make up in your head. But I'm here to tell you that something's wrong, right? If all of a sudden you see adoption decline, or it never hits the velocity that you're hoping it would, these are things to be paying attention to. And your customer success team or your training team or your scale team or whomever needs to intervene, because your customer likely probably doesn't know how to take advantage of the product, right? Maybe they went through the training and then they went on vacation and they forgot everything they learned, and they came back and they're like, oh, I don't know how to use this. I'm just going to go back to using Evernote or OneNote or something else. It happens, right? Don't make excuses for poor adoption. Instead, reach out to your customers and understand what's changed. Now, sometimes it's, hey, we've got conflicting priorities. If your product is something that is correlated to different programs or initiatives in their business and their strategy or focus has changed, maybe it's declined for that reason. Doesn't mean they're unhappy, doesn't mean they're struggling, just means, hey, we've got to put this on the back burner for a moment. But If you don't know that, you can't manage the account effectively. So when there is poor adoption, you've got to use those warning signs and really dig in. Product needs. I am confident, and I won't even say I guess or I think, I'm confident that all of your customers would love your product to do something it doesn't do today, whether that is a net new feature that they'd like you to build or enhancement to something you already have. But it's important to understand how their product needs might be impacting their ability to use the product. Quite frankly, right? Day one, your product, they bought it, great, it meets all their needs. Year 4, maybe their organization has grown and evolved in a way that your product hasn't. And as a result, the product gaps are preventing them from using the product in a way that is going to help drive their business forward. So you've got to be able to pay attention to their product needs. And again, as a CSM, right, or a customer success professional, you're going to have to understand what those gaps are and make sure that you're advocating internally and communicating internally to make sure that things are being developed or being accounted for, or at the very least that you understand the risks of not developing or innovating that way. And the last thing here is new use cases, right? It is so important to remember that your customers aren't using the product the same way all the time. New use cases are going to evolve, and it's your job to help educate, enable them on how to take advantage of the product to solve those new use cases. We've got customers who out the gate, they're trying to solve for problem A, but guess what? In 6 months, they're like, hey, Kristi, we've actually realized that we've got problem B. How do we use the product for that? And so again, training, enabling them around these new use cases not only helps them get more value from the product, but it's going to help grow with them, which hopefully will result in more retention and growth over time. So for all these things, right, these are all things that are going to happen. These are events or milestones that happen throughout your customer lifecycle. And these are happening to everybody, right? These are not product, agnostic, like everybody is going through these same challenges. And as a CS professional, you need to make sure that you're paying attention to this and that you're managing these things effectively. Now, I did say, I had mentioned, okay, well, Kristi, we can't solve all this individually, right? We're not staffed that way. So let me just introduce a couple different things that you can do to scale your efforts. First, create training videos. Right? Create a repository of product training videos that you can also keep current, that your team, your customers can reference over time. For example, your customer buys a new license. How cool would it be if when that person joins, you have an automated email that goes out and it provides them with links to all these training videos and these guides, introduces your knowledge base, right? It helps them get up and running and doesn't require any additional training or enablement from your team. That would be a great way to help ensure that your customers, as you're adding new users, are getting what they paid for. The next thing there is your one-to-one enablement. Now, this isn't necessarily a scale effort, but I put it here because there is value in the engagements that your customers have with their CSMs over time. For example, our team, we have a kind of mid to high engagement model where we would encourage our customers to meet with us in a regular recurring cadence. That engagement will enable us to go and lean in and provide training where needed, right? We might be using those meetings to help our customers understand, hey, here's new features that have been released. Here's things that you should be doing. Or, hey, we're working with this other customer and they're using the product, really cool. And here's what they're doing. Maybe you should give that a try. But those one-to-one conversations actually provide a lot of value for your customer because they're tailored and specific to their needs and hopefully the timing as well. The next thing is having a robust built-out knowledge base. So whether you're using something like Confluence or you're using Notion or you're using Zendesk, it doesn't matter what you use. There's tons of things you can use, but you've got to have a knowledge base where your customers can go and get answers to questions that they have when they have them. Trust me, your CSMs and your support team will thank you for it. In-app guides. In-app guides are super helpful. These would be like little pop-ups or guided experiences in your solution that would help your customers as they're navigating things for either the first time or they haven't used it in a while or they're a new user. So there's really cool things you can do with in-app experiences. Sometimes it could just be a general, hey, did you know? And that's totally fine too. But making sure that you're providing your customers with an in-app experience can also help accelerate their training, enablement, and their long-term adoption. The next thing is a one-to-many program. This could be by way of webinars. Something that we launched was our masterclass program, which helps take one of our senior CSMs, KGP, who I believe is on the call today, and where she actually leads as an expert someone who uses the product day in and day out to help enable our customers on those use cases, workflows, and really get the most out of the product. So think about designing different programs like that. Will help your customers make sure that they're always learning and growing and finding creative ways to use your product. And the last one here is product marketing. Now, depending on the size of your organization, you may or may not have a product marketing team, or you may or may not have a product marketing resource. But hopefully, at the very least, you're probably kicking off some product marketing engagements or programs. And even if they are the bare minimum, this will help make sure that at some point, whether it's new product innovation or some other point in time, that you're really helping engage and educate your customers on what the product can do and what they can get out of it. Now, this is super helpful, especially for innovation, right? You've rolled out a new product. Let's not wait for your next call for your CSM, especially when people are on vacation. It is the summer. Let's make sure that you're educating your customers in a timely manner. So making sure that you're leveraging those product marketing initiatives can be super helpful. So it's always critical to make sure that you're just always educating your customers. And using one or all of these really helps at different stages. Now, I love to introduce a couple things here. Again, this mouse pad, I appreciate you being patient with me. There's a ton of different products that you can use. And I do see in the chat that you guys are all sharing ideas around products that you've used and things that you love. And that's awesome. I'm always a big advocate of that as well. Just to introduce a couple of things that I've seen work really well to solve certain problems. For customer support, making sure that you have something there, whether that be Zendesk or using Intercom, Drift. I've seen really cool and unique use cases from all of these and others as well. Forgive me, I didn't have the time to build a slide here that had every single product, but you get the drift. For customer success management, we recommend obviously ClientSuccess. Product-led growth, this might help with things like those in-app experiences that I just talked about, which could be WalkMe, Pendo, AppQues. Can also use Intercom for that as well. Product analytics. So being able to have that product level data is critical, right? All the things I talked about today are anchored around the insights and data. And if you don't have access to that, it's gonna make it pretty tricky. So using things like Pendo or Heap, getting those insights and analytics is gonna be critical to you, right? It'll help you build your success score. It'll help just inform your team on what to do and when to do it. And then customer feedback, also really important, but using solutions like Delighted, User Voice, or again, even ClientSuccess for things like that will help you get the feedback from your customers on what's working and what's not working. Those are all really important because again, like I said, it's not necessarily that your product doesn't have everything that it's supposed to have, or even that what it's supposed to have isn't working as needed, but it is possible that you find that hey, your customers just need something else, right? That innovation is key. So even getting feedback around product needs and innovation, makes sense. So how you're collecting that information and then disseminating it across your organization. So these are just a couple tools, different things that I've seen work well, things that I've enjoyed using myself, but take a look at those. Obviously, like I said, there are plenty others. Now, you know me, I love to end with just a, hey, don't do these. So I'm going to give you my top 5 adoption mistakes to avoid, and then we'll get to some Q&A. So thankfully, I think I've left 10 minutes at least. But first thing is figure out the best product metrics to track adoption for your solution, right? Avoid trying to compare to what you've seen in the past or using generic metrics that you feel like are a one size fits all. Every product should be used a very particular way. And so it's important for you to figure out how should your customers be using your product, right? It's also, again, important, I talked about this earlier, thinking about it through the lens of different places in their life cycle, different segments, but all of that is really key. Don't come up with some like one size fits all. Don't keep the metrics extremely generic. If your customers are just logging in, that is not enough. Number 2, don't ignore product adoption when considering customer health. Like I said, I've seen a bunch of folks go and create a customer health score that doesn't take into consideration how they're using the product. They feel like, well, if the customer is telling us that they're happy, they're engaging with us, they're an advocate, right? They'll pull in almost every other metric under the sun, but they don't pull in usage, adoption, and data. And I'm telling you, that's a huge mistake. So please get access to this data and use it as you see fit, but make sure that it is being accounted for because it will help inform you pretty well. Number 3, don't assume because your customers are using the product that they're healthy. So I think I started out with this, right? Yes, product usage and adoption is so critical to pay attention to, but that does not mean that because they're using your product, that they're getting what they need and they're healthy. I had a customer a long time ago using the product day in and day out, but for a year they were deprecating our solution and deploying a whole new product. Came time for the renewal and they said, okay, thank you very much. We're like, no, of course we would have some risk indicators, right? They wouldn't be using the product. They, I don't know. We assumed all of these things, but they were using the products, right? So you can't just make sure you're just paying attention to that, but it is really important. Number 4, don't assume that usage and adoption are the same thing, right? Again, I talked about this. Separate out the two. If they're logging in, percentage of logins, percentage of users, all that is great. How they're using your product, how deep they're using it, if they're using the sticky features in it, all really critical. So please break the two out, pay attention to them, and come up with the metrics that make the most sense for your business. And number 5 here, ensure adoption evolves over time. Just because they're using the product today doesn't mean that using it that way a year from now is going to show that they are actually getting what they need out of it. They should be advancing, right? Your product hopefully is innovating. As it's innovating, they should be using more. They should be doing different things with it. So pay attention to adoption as it evolves through life cycle and over time for that customer. So those are my mistakes to avoid. That said, I'm going to hop over to the Q&A. If you haven't had a chance to go and drop your questions in there, please go ahead and do that, and we'll get to a couple of those right now. So I'm going to stop sharing. Ooh, this is such a different background than what I'm used to at my home. Let's take a look at some of the questions that have come in. All right. Oh, some very good questions here. Let's get started. Regarding product analytics, how do you stack Full Story up against Pendo and Heap? I've actually used Full Story and I've used Pendo. I haven't used Heap. I'd rather not give my specific recommendations on any particular products. I think that each product in its own right provides a ton of value. I think it's more important to figure out what it is that you need and the insights that you need access to and determine what solution to go with. Happy to provide later maybe like things I loved about each of the products that I've used and why, rather than kind of say, hey, I'd prefer this one or this one gives you more or less. Like I said, each product is different, just the same way that ClientSuccess is different from all of the different products in our market. And while that's, we like to think that we've got unique differentiators, I'm sure our competitors would say the same. So I think they're all great. They all provide different value. It depends on finding what you need. How do you measure stickiness? So again, this might be some part of your product that that if your customers are using and adopting this one part of it, that they've really integrated it into their workflow. Like I said, so for example, with Slack, they came up and said, hey, look, we have done all this data analysis. We have figured out that if a user of Slack sends, I forget what their magic number of Slack messages was, but if they send this magic number of Slack messages, they end up using and adopting Slack into their workflow. And so you need to figure out what your sticky is. At ClientSuccess, we have a couple. So for one, our customer Pulse. Pulse is probably our highest adopted feature in our solution. And so when customers have really integrated that into their workflow, where they are updating a customer Pulse every time they engage with a customer, hear back, good, bad, or otherwise, are using reason codes very effectively, we know that the customer is getting value out of that part. And usually because of how it works in their workflow, it's a sticky feature for us. Same thing with something else that we have in our product, which is our success cycles, which is similar to like a playbook. But those cycles also indicate to us that our customers have integrated this in their workflow. They're depending on it for their to-dos and their actions that they're taking throughout the life cycle. So those are two things for us that we know, hey, if they're using these parts of the product and they're doing X number of activities in each of those, that the product is pretty sticky. And so we look at that for the end users. So I think it's just analyzing your product and trying to figure out, well, what are those sticky things? Like, what are the things that we can look at and pay attention to, that if our customers use these things all the time, that it's probably proven that they're getting some value from it. Next one we had here is, what are best-in-class analytic tools to measure customers' platform usage? Kind of going back to some of the other points I made earlier. Happy to provide a list of some that I've seen that I've gotten value out of. I've used Pendo in the past. I've really liked Pendo. I've used PX, which is one of Gainsight's products in the past, and I've gotten value out of that as well. I really do think that it just depends on what you're looking for, what data you have access to, your software. Some folks actually will just even use their own APIs if they've got data that they can collect in the back end and put it into BI solutions and tools that way. That can be helpful. So again, I'm going to give you a big, it depends on what your needs are, but I think I've seen value from a lot of the solutions out there on the market. Somebody else asked, at ClientSuccess, what's your CSM to account ratio? How often do you recommend engaging with customers, and what's the content? Have you delineated the difference in content between customer touchpoints and business reviews? Oh gosh, this is a whole nother question that really takes us off the track of adoption and usage. But I will say that I've done boot camps on a lot of these things, like coming up with that ratio. Again, just because we've designed a ratio that works for us doesn't mean that me sharing that will help you. There should be a lot of things that you analyze and consider when you're thinking about your ratio model, but I did do a boot camp on that. So please, you can go back and go revisit that. Our engagement with our customers varies. We don't tell our customers how often that they should engage with us, because why should we be dictating to them? Instead, we really ask our customers, we make recommendations and say, hey, customers that look like you at this stage in the journey who are trying to accomplish X tend to engage with us on a biweekly cadence. We think that's a good fit. Does that work for you? And most customers will say yes, others might say no. So it really does depend, but we try to make ourselves available. And then in terms of content, I believe I published some information around that too. Basically like a buffet of, hey, here's all the things that you should be covering with your customers as you engage with them on an ongoing basis. But if you, whoever dropped that question, it was anonymous. If you want to message me on LinkedIn, happy to pull together some resources and point you in the right direction of other things you can go and reference. And the last question that we have here in our Q&A is, I'm curious if you have any suggestions for a service that runs in the background and isn't a proactive usage solution. I work in cybersecurity and we provide a monitoring service on customers' networks. Therefore, they do not use this product. The only way to track engagement is through a current underdeveloped customer portal, attendance on service review calls, and renewal metrics. Yeah, I mean, if you don't have proper customer telemetry, it's really difficult. Happy to get into that, but this is a much deeper conversation. So again, Shauna, that was from you. So if you want to just message me, I'm happy to get on a call with you and share with you some of the things that I did. I worked for a company that had hardware devices. I also worked in a space that had on-prem technology that we didn't have that same telemetry, right? It wasn't a SaaS product where I can log in and see and get easy access to all of that. So happy to share with you some of the strategies that we deployed there. But that is definitely a much heavier one to answer than we'll have time for in the last 2 minutes that I've got available right now. Last question here. How do you balance very specific feature requests from certain clients with product strategy that will benefit majority of your clients? Okay, also deviating a little bit from product usage and adoption, but happy to cover this a bit. So, I mean, really, I will tell you the most difficult part of my job as a leader in any organization is always leaning in on product development, right? Because there's always going to be a winner and a loser, right? There you have customers who need and want to enhance new things. You've got a product team who wants to develop and innovate and create new things. You've got a sales team who's requesting, new competitive differentiators. So it is a balance. For us, we just try to keep good track of who's asking for what. One of the things that we like to do is, if you give your customers access to something like Canny or other solutions there, Canny is going to be a product kind of like feature portal idea place where your customers can go and log feature ideas that your product team can then go and view and analyze. In that experience, they can go and read other folks, other feature ideas that had been submitted. They can upvote things and the like. And so that's a great way for us to just see, like, who are the customers who are asking for these things, who wants them, why do they want it, what are some of the use cases? Because we can see all the upvotes, we can see what are the most requested product features and enhancements. Because also we can pull in customer data. You can also start to do analysis around, well, what's the volume of logos impacted by this, but also what's the ARR impacted by it. So I think there's a lot of cool things you can do if you've got access to collecting that information in a centralized location, but then also overlaying your customer data into it, because again, you want to do the things that are going to help your customers, but also drive the most value for your business as well. So I know that we're at time. I know that I kind of went pretty fast through some of those, but I do appreciate all the engagement and participation once again. I'm going to go and enjoy my trip in Austin. Again, for any of you who are in the area, I'm in Austin, Texas. We're going to be having a customer success meetup this evening. If you'd like to learn more, please feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to share you the place to go and register for the event this evening. Otherwise, I will see you all again next week, next Tuesday, same time, same place, where we will continue this conversation. So many people have dropped off already. I didn't have a chance to grab the link here for the survey that I asked, but if all of you can hang on for 1 second, I will grab that and drop it into the chat. I'd love to hear from you all. Just tell me where you want the community to live. Here it is in the channel. So please, if you're still on, I do see quite a few of you. I just dropped the link there in chat. Please click on that answer. It's a 1-question survey. I just want to hear you. Let me know where you want us to build the community for you. Keep these bootcamp conversations going, keep the learning and continued education. So thank you all again. I will see you next week. If you need anything, feel free to reach out. Otherwise, talk to you soon. Bye, everyone.